Thanks so much for being with us here on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Joy Lim Nakrin here with attorney Josh Schiffer joining us. Thanks so much for being with us, Josh.
Thanks so much for the invitation. I love these Mondays with Joy.
We appreciate you being here. Okay, so of course we have several top stories that we want to ask you about. First of all, something that sort of, kind of got lost in the shuffle over the weekend because everyone's thinking about the holidays and people don't generally pay as much attention to news over the weekends. We are aware of this. The not guilty verdict in the sexual harassment trial of former Fulton County DA Paul Howard. So this is something that came down Friday afternoon. I think that our viewers are aware that Paul Howard had been, Fulton County DA, a district attorney for Fulton County 24 years, and was being sued by a former employee for sexual harassment. And this jury came back with a not guilty verdict fairly quickly. Josh, first of all, what's your reaction?
My initial reaction is that we always trust and respect what a jury has done. They're presented with a very limited scope of work, and it's the scope of work that the court has instructed them to consider. So without getting into all of the details in the entire Paul Howard story, I'm always going to go ahead and trust a jury because they're the ones specifically empowered to render judgment. And the subject matter in this case was something that Mr. Howard has dealt with allegations of for quite a long time, and that is relationships in and around his office. Paul Howard has one of the most long and storied legal careers here in Fulton County. He was a junior prosecutor long back in the day, 30-something years ago, eventually worked his way up and was elected the Solicitor General of Fulton County there in the late 90s. And then when the Honorable Lewis Slayton, who our courthouse is named after here in Fulton County, finally retired, Paul Howard was part of a small group of individuals who very, very aggressively campaigned for the Fulton County District Attorney's job. He was the first African American to hold that position, and he held that position for over 2 decades. Paul Howard's office became the font and original stop for pretty much most of the prominent prosecutors we see in and around the Fulton County and Metro Atlanta region because it was the largest and busiest prosecutor's office. So a lot of the names our audience is familiar with, they have a connection somewhere with Paul Howard. Similar to the Cyrus Vance in Manhattan, it was the premium office in the state. It also handled some of the biggest cases. We're talking about our football players, our prominent murders. Really, the biggest legal crime stories in the state flowed through Fulton County. At the last election, Fulton County saw a substantive challenger to Paul Howard, that be Fonnie Willis, one of his top lieutenants, someone that he had trained and mentored for years. And as we all know, Miss Willis won in that contest, only to jump into an office that had more work than I think Mr. Howard could have possibly imagined. In the time since that, Mr. Howard has been dealing with this case as well as establishing his own practice and moving on in the universe. This case is quite old. It began many years ago and finally reached a federal trial on the very specific and limited facts involving whether the workplace relationship he had with this employee was consensual, non-consensual, and whether it created a hostile workplace. In the end, the jury returned a verdict quite quickly. It was a Friday afternoon verdict, and Mr. Howard was found not to be liable or in the case, not to be found culpable for the allegations made, and he walked out of court victorious.
You talked about how quick this was. So I guess the jury just heard a day and a half of testimony, which is really not that much, right? I mean, it's pretty quick. And then closing arguments took place Friday morning. Jury got the case at 1:05 p.m. and a few hours later, like 2.5 hours later, they come to the verdict.
It's really quick when it's really quick when you've had so much pretrial involved, and a lot of people need to understand the court system really works hard to limit how much work and the scope of work for a jury. And that's exactly what they did here. In literally years of pretrial motions, different claims were adjudicated by the court to make the eventual trial as small and narrow as possible. And it was small and narrow. You're talking about less than really 3 days total from presentation, picking a jury, charging the jury, having the evidence, and then rendering a verdict. That's because the questions asked were really discrete and specific. This is the way the system is supposed to work, even though I know a number of people are disappointed in the eventual result.
And one thing I wanted to ask you about was just the fact that he represented himself. I guess, something that Erica, Erica Wilson, another local attorney, something that she was talking about. She thought that it was going to give him, that combined with his background was going to give him quite an advantage, during jury selection, because there were so many potential bases for bias. I mean, in his job, prosecuting hundreds, maybe thousands of cases. I guess it should be thousands of cases, really.
It's many hundreds of thousands of cases. It's the largest and busiest felony jurisdiction in the state of Georgia. Mr. Howard's name is on some death penalty cases, along with, hundreds and hundreds of Georgia's worst criminals are serving sentences that were prosecuted in whole or in part by Paul Howard. He's an extraordinarily accomplished lawyer. He did not get to be in a position to be district attorney without spending years in the trenches, in the solicitor's office, in the DA's office, trying cases, and managing other trial lawyers. So I believe he is the exception to the rule when it comes to self-representation, which is normally something everyone warns against for very good reasons. I need to caution everyone, this case was extraordinarily unique. That's why it ended up going to trial, is because of the novel issues and defenses Paul Howard had to present, specifically related to the reciprocality within the relationship and the continuation of that relationship over a period of years. Then it made it difficult for a jury to rule with or to side with the plaintiffs.
Yeah. All right, Josh, well, thanks so much for your input on that. I want to ask you about, of course, another major story that we've been following as well, and that involves former Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani. And, we already knew that before his trial began, this was essentially a damages trial for defamation. He had already been found liable for defamation, or guilty, I guess I should say liable, because it's in civil court.
Yeah.
And now ordered to pay $148 million to these two Georgia election workers, mother and daughter, Shane Moss and Ruby Freeman, who, he was already found to have defamed. And the question before the jury was, how much should he pay them? $148 million is the answer. Remember that he falsely accused them of meddling in the election, of basically exchanging electronic drives, flipping votes in Georgia after the 2020 election. And they received, these horrible threats, racist threats. Some of the voicemails were played in court. Some of the messages were read aloud in court. And it was very emotional testimony from both of the women. And then in the end, Giuliani decided not to testify.
Absolutely, this was legal theater unlike anything anybody's ever seen, especially coming from someone. Rudy Giuliani was one of the most prominent members of the legal community in the nation. He was a political leader of the highest caliber, and for a point had a successful run for the presidency. This is someone who was profoundly accomplished. So to see this particular fall from grace has been very difficult for me and many others to kind of deal with and understand, because now at the age of 80, we are seeing someone who even during this trial was outside of the court in the evening making statements that just were unexplainable to the average lawyer or criminal court watcher, legal justice fan. You don't get out there and talk about the evidence that's going to come in, and not bring in that evidence. You don't violate a judge's orders, literally walking outside of court in the evening. Now, as you stated, this was basically a damages trial. Liability had been established by the judge previously, and the damages relate specifically to what the two complainants, Ms. Freeman and Ms. Moss, dealt with in the aftermath of Rudy Giuliani's actions in the post-election setting. Mr. Giuliani went on television, radio, the internet, appeared in different courts, and said a large number of factually incorrect statements regarding these two female poll workers here in Fulton County. That then led to outrageous abuse. You're talking about threats, you're talking about racism, you're talking about actions from anonymous members of the fringe in America that basically made it their mission to torture these two innocent women. And these women, it has been determined, did absolutely nothing wrong. There has been no evidence of any malfeasance from them, yet their names were so prominently put forth by Rudy Giuliani in his effort to illustrate and change the results of the 2020 election. When it comes to collectability, that's really the big question. People hear $48 million, how? Now, Rudy Giuliani has made a lot of money in his life. I don't think anybody has a clear picture of his entire financial estate because it's so complicated. He has multiple marriages, children, wives. He has been under substantial financial pressure regarding child support and marital financial issues. So I know that there is a long line of individuals chasing Mr. Giuliani for whatever assets he has. This $48 million will be added into that chase, but then again, only after he has exhausted his appellate remedies. And I believe his lawyers already come out and said that they were going to be appealing this jury ruling. And so therefore, there are specific protections to protect the validity of the ruling while also allowing Mr. Giuliani to avail himself of all the legal remedies anyone facing this kind of ruling has to deal with. So it's going to be some more time. No one knows whether anybody's actually going to get paid. And I'd be surprised if Mr. Giuliani hadn't received some very good guidance in asset protection over the last 20 or 30 years of his career. So don't be surprised to see some of his assets protected in a way that allows him to continue operating in the standard of life that he's used to.
In other words, you think that these women may never see the money?
Unfortunately, that is my initial gut reaction. There's a number of creditors in front of these women. This judgment wasn't effectuated until a specific date. In fact, that judgment's still being perfected. There's been a ruling that it will be converted into a judgment. And when you collect unsecured judgments, unsecured guarantees, and other consumer debt, there's a priority process involved, and the older debts tend to get satisfied before the newer debts, and that's only after the secured debts. If he has any secured commercial paper obligations out there, those are going to be handled prior to any defamation charges or any defamation costs. So I don't believe they're going to see a payday anytime soon. We'll have to see what time brings us.
Got it. Okay, let's ask you about this next story that we're following, and this has to do with Cobb County's new school district maps, which a federal judge has thrown out, saying that essentially these maps were drawn to minimize Black and Latino votes, and there was a lawsuit that stems from these claims that the maps essentially diminish the ability of minority voters to equally participate in the process of electing Cobb County school board members. Okay, Josh, first of all, what's your reaction to this ruling here?
I think it's the correct ruling, and I think Judge Ross, who is a well-respected member of our federal judiciary, is standing on firm ground. These cases are closely watched locally as well as nationally because gerrymandering and the Fair Voting Act, that's hot stuff right now. We haven't figured out nationally what the standards are and how to control the development and evolution of our electoral maps. That's because no matter where you are in the country, both conservative and liberal folks are in charge of the process, and so they want to preserve power while also preventing the application of power by the opposition, no matter where it is, and there's not a lot of agreement. So what we have here in Cobb County, which is where I was raised and know the most about of any county in Georgia, is that Cobb County is nearing the end of a complete reversal of its political position compared to the 1980s and 90s when Cobb County was the home of America's neocon community, led by congresspeople such as Bob Barr and Newt Gingrich. Ralph Reed was a big player in Cobb County, and it was the home of the dominant right-wing conservative movement here in America. That has changed completely over the last 20 to 30 years as Cobb County has gone from deep red, then to purple, and now to pretty strongly blue. And the Cobb County School District school board is the only remaining GOP-controlled agency within the county. When it came to drawing these districts, there were a lot of allegations in this quest to preserve power or share power or acquire power, where there were allegations made that members of the school district were part of organizations or connected to groups that were untoward and did not respect the totality of Cobb County citizenry, then compounded with this district redrawing process that, according to Judge Ross, unfairly stacks the Cobb County school board districts so that white conservative groups would dominate the 4 positions in the northern portion of the county, while African American and other minority groups would only dominate the 3 positions in the southern part of the county, thereby maintaining a conservative grip on the on the Cobb County Board of Education. That is in direct opposition to the rest of Cobb County politics, so you knew that this case was going to be aggressively litigated, and now we've got a ruling from Judge Ross. Judge Ross's ruling is particularly important because of the time at play. Without new districts, we don't know exactly what's going to happen with the pending election controlling the Cobb County School Board.
Got it. Okay, Josh, we really appreciate your insight and analysis. Any final thoughts on any of these cases that you want to share?
I think from a state perspective, the school district board case the school district case in Cobb County is especially important because we're going to have more battles involving how districts are designed in Georgia as Georgia continues to become a little bit more purple and the political population changes. As for Giuliani, very interested to see how this ruling affects, or whether it affects at all, any of the other cases that he is involved in, as he is so closely tied to the former president and other people under multiple investigations in multiple states, specifically the false elector theory that has now expanded dramatically out in Michigan, out in Arizona. There are additional inquiries going on whether his role in that was illegal or criminal in some manner. That's going to be very, very interesting to follow, as whatever happens to Rudy could impact the president or some of these other individuals.
All right, Josh, and before we let you go, if maybe someone's interested in hiring you, what kind of cases do you do? How do they reach out to you?
They can just Google Joshua Schiffer. You'll find one of a bunch of ways to reach me. I just love representing individuals. I personally practice a lot of criminal work and complex injury work with my partner, Doug Chenko, here in Georgia, out of our office in the Virgin Islands and many other states as well. We just like good people.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh Schiffer, for your insight and analysis. We're going to keep following all of these top legal stories. Sorry, I'm distracted because I'm trying to get up our logos here, and I'm trying to do the tech while I'm talking. It's not working so well. But I promise you that our tech does work well, and our devoted digital team works very hard. And if you download our free Atlanta News First app in the Apple Store, or Google Play, you can get it for free. You get alerts sent right to your phone. And of course, we're always streaming. So thank you so much for being with us. Our next live broadcast on traditional television is at 3 p.m. Thanks so much for being with us.